Curiosity. Hook. What would you do if you saw an old woman alone on a freezing street and everyone else just kept walking? Would you stop or just pretend not to see? The city of Meadowfield was usually alive on a Friday night. Music from open bars, the shouts of teenagers at the basketball court, laughter drifting out of restaurants. But tonight, for some reason, the streets seemed muted, almost holding their breath. Streetlights flickered yellow. Somewhere far off, the shriek of a subway blended with the tired hum of traffic. In that stillness, Malik Hayes pedaled his battered bike past shuttered shops, the wind sharp through his thin hoodie. Malik had just finished a backbreaking shift at Dollar Max. 5 hours stocking shelves, 3 run-ins with impatient customers, and the store manager, Mrs. Garver, warning him that being a minute late again meant no hours next week. But right now, none of that mattered. He just wanted to get home, shower off the sweat, and see if there was any pizza left in the fridge. As he turned the corner near Jefferson Pharmacy, Malik saw something that made him squeeze his brakes. There, perched on the curb beneath a dying street lamp, sat an elderly woman. She was tiny, her silver hair like a halo in the pale light, a tattered floral dress blowing around her thin ankles. No purse, no coat, just her hands folded in her lap as though she'd been waiting for a ride that would never come. People passed her, some glanced, most didn't. An office worker with AirPods, a couple arguing about dinner, a delivery man juggling a pizza box. No one stopped. The woman didn't cry. She didn't call for help. She just stared at the empty parking lot, eyes lost in a world only she could see. Malik nearly kept going. He had homework. He was hungry. Someone else would help, right? But something about her stillness, the kind of stillness that had given up hoping for rescue, gnawed at him. He looped back, parking his bike a safe distance away. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice gentle. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up slowly, as if surfacing from a deep sleep. Her eyes were cloudy but kind. I was supposed to call someone," she murmured, "but I can't remember the number, or where I live." Malik knelt beside her, offering his phone. She stared at it as though it were an alien artifact. "What's your name?" he tried. She hesitated, her lips trembling. "I think it's Noreen. Noreen Abbot." The name meant nothing to Malik, but the way she clung to it, like a raft in a storm, broke his heart. He took off his hoodie and gently draped it around her shoulders, ignoring her feeble protest. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." He guided her, slowly, patiently, onto the crossbar of his old bike. Noreen was light as a feather, barely more than a shadow. Malik steered carefully, every block feeling like a leap of faith. He didn't take her to a hospital. He didn't trust the city's shelters after hearing stories of missing blankets and lost old ladies. Instead, he rode straight to the one place he knew she'd be safe, his Aunt Tasha's tiny apartment above the bakery. Aunt Tasha didn't ask questions when she saw Malik wheeling a frail stranger into her kitchen. She just took in Noreen's bare hands, the worn shoes, the haunted look in her eyes, and nodded. "Sit," she said, pulling a second mug from the cupboard. Noreen sipped the hot chamomile tea slowly, her sentences meandering like stray cats. "I had a garden once," she whispered, "with white roses and wild thyme. Do you know the smell of jasmine at dawn?" She smiled at a photo on the wall, a young woman full of life. "She looks kind," she said. "That was my mom," Malik replied softly. By midnight, Noreen was dozing on the couch, Aunt Tasha's knitted blanket over her knees. Malik made her a pillow out of an old hoodie, dimmed the lights, and whispered, "Good night, Miss Noreen." He watched her sleep for a while, wondering about her story. Who had she been? Why had no one stopped? The next morning, Malik awoke to the smell of coffee and the clatter of pans. But when he checked the living room, Noreen was gone. No note, no footprints, just the blanket folded neatly and her teacup rinsed and left to dry. 3 days passed. Malik barely slept. He rode his bike up and down every block, peered under awnings, checked the corners where old men played chess and where night workers smoked after shifts. He asked at the bakery, the church, even the bus station, "Have you seen an old woman? Short, silver hair, gentle eyes, maybe lost. No one had. Some shook their heads politely. Others looked at him like he was wasting their time. Aunt Tasha told him, "Sometimes the city just swallows people up, Malik. You did what you could." But Malik couldn't let it go. He found himself looking at every face in the crowd, wondering if he'd spot her fragile figure somewhere, walking the streets in her borrowed hoodie. As the days ticked by, Malik started to doubt himself. Had he imagined it? Had the night, the exhaustion, played tricks on his mind? On the fifth morning, something arrived in the mail. No return address, just a plain cream envelope, the kind that feels more expensive than it looks. And on the front, in careful block letters, "To the young man who noticed." Malik stared at it for a long minute before opening it. Inside was a single business card, heavy and embossed in gold. "The Abbott Trust, Private Affairs." On the back, written in shaky cursive, "You reminded me of someone I used to be." N.A. below that, an address, 5 Renford Lane. Malik's heart thudded. Aunt Tasha examined the card, eyebrows high. "That's the old mansion up in the Heights," she said. "Nobody ever goes there except for the groundskeepers. I thought it was empty." Malik turned the card over and over. For 2 days, he kept it on his dresser, telling himself he wouldn't go. It was probably a mistake or a prank, but on the third morning, he stuffed it in his jacket and caught the number 7 bus heading north, out of the city's gray heart and into the leafy sprawl of the Heights. As the city fell away behind him, Malik noticed the world changing. Broken sidewalks were replaced by smooth stone, graffiti disappeared, and small houses gave way to massive iron gates and manicured hedges. He got off 2 stops early, wanting to walk the last stretch. It felt almost unreal. At the edge of a block, he found the gate, tall, black wrought iron, curling up into shapes that looked almost like vines. The name on the plaque, Abbott House. For a moment, Malik just stood there, doubting himself. But then, as if on cue, the gate creaked open with a slow, stately groan. A woman in a navy blue suit appeared, eyes warm but sharp. "Mr. Malik Hayes?" she asked. "We've been expecting you. Miss Abbott is in the garden. She doesn't like walls much these days." Malik followed her through winding paths lined with white hydrangeas and ancient oaks. The world was silent, except for the distant chirping of birds and the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Around a bend, on a wooden bench nestled beneath an enormous willow, sat Noreen. She wore a soft gray sweater, her hands folded serenely in her lap. She looked up as he approached. "You came," she said simply, and her eyes shone. "I had to," Malik replied, heart pounding. I wasn't sure if I should." They sat in gentle silence. For a while, the only sound was the wind rustling through the garden. Finally, Noreen spoke, her voice distant but steady. "You remind me of my brother long ago. He always stopped, even when it was inconvenient or embarrassing. He used to say, 'Kindness is never wasted, even if nobody sees it.'" Malik didn't know what to say. He was just a kid who'd stop because he couldn't not stop. But he listened, and that seemed to be enough. Noreen smiled, pressing something into his hand, a folded piece of stationery, sealed with a delicate paperclip. "This is for you," she whispered, "not because I owe you, but because I want you to have a chance I never had." Inside, Malik found not a check, but a formal letter, a full scholarship, tuition and living expenses for any college he chose. No strings attached, signed and notarized by Noreen herself. He stared at it, stunned. I can't take this." "You already did," she replied, her voice soft but fierce. "I built my world on deals and numbers. People feared me. But nobody ever just saw me, until you." Malik's hands trembled. He'd always believed in small things, in holding doors and saying thank you, in noticing, but he'd never thought it mattered much. Now he saw it did. They talked a little longer, mostly about nothing. Gardens, jasmine tea, the sound of summer rain. When he left, Noreen pressed a final note into his palm. "Do something good. That's all I ask. The rest will take care of itself." 3 days later, as Malik was fixing the squeaky door to Aunt Tasha's bakery, a black sedan pulled up. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, introducing himself as Victor Grant, Abbott Trust Legal Affairs. He handed over a leather folder. Inside, the official endowment papers, signed and sealed. The scholarship was real. The numbers were dizzying. Aunt Tasha had to sit down, her hands shaking. "Why?" she whispered, voice cracking. "Because someone remembered your nephew's kindness," Victor said, and Ms. Abbott believed in repaying it in her own way. News spread fast. The local paper ran a headline: "Teen's act of kindness changes two lives." A week later, a TV crew showed up at school. Malik's teachers congratulated him. Students he'd never met gave him high fives, wanted to sit at his lunch table, asked if he'd always been that nice. But Malik knew the truth. He was no hero. He was just a kid who couldn't look away. One afternoon, his old English teacher asked him to speak at a youth center downtown. The room was filled with skeptical faces, kids from every walk of life. Malik stood awkwardly, hands in pockets, and finally said, "I almost didn't stop that night. I almost told myself it was none of my business. But I thought of my Aunt Tasha. What if it was her out there, needing someone?" He didn't say much more, but someone filmed it, and soon his words were everywhere. Kindness is never wasted, even when nobody's watching. Weeks drifted by, and the noise around Malik's story began to fade. The news articles turned yellow and disappeared from the front pages. The television segments got replaced by fresher scandals. And at school, the cafeteria chatter shifted from, "Did you see what Malik did?" to basketball scores and college rumors. But for Malik, something inside him had changed, quietly, profoundly. He couldn't walk the old streets the same way anymore. Every familiar corner now seemed to hold a story. The man outside the corner store wasn't just another panhandler. He was a person with a past and a future. The woman at the bakery register, hands red from years of washing dishes, became someone Malik wanted to ask, "How are you really?" He saw people, truly saw them, and that awareness, it was a weight, but it was also a gift. One gray Sunday afternoon, Malik found himself returning to Abbott House, as if pulled by a thread he couldn't name. The iron gate opened slowly, almost inviting him in. This time the same woman in the navy suit only smiled and said, "She's in the sunroom." "She likes the light." Noreen sat by the window wrapped in a soft shawl, her eyes on the garden outside. She looked older, more fragile than before, but her gaze still had that quiet, fierce intelligence. "You came back," she said, her voice barely louder than the rain tapping the glass. "I wanted to say thank you," Malik replied, sitting beside her. "But also, I wanted to ask, how did you know that I would care, that I would show up?" She looked at him, the corners of her mouth twitching into a smile. "Because once, a long time ago, I was you, and someone showed up for me." She reached over, pulling a tiny white envelope from a desk drawer. "I don't need much these days, Malik, but I have one last thing to give." Inside the envelope was a small note, the handwriting trembling but strong. "You do not owe the world a performance. Just keep paying attention. The right moment will always find you, and when it does, act." Malik folded the note and slipped it into his wallet behind his bus pass, beside the card she'd first sent him. He didn't cry, and neither did Noreen. They just sat in the light, talking of gardens and books, until the rain let up and it was time for him to go. The letter arrived on a Thursday, no return address, just his name in a careful serif type. He knew before he opened it, Noreen Abbot had passed quietly in her sleep. The funeral was small, private, held in the sunroom filled with the scent of jasmine and soft afternoon sun. There was no big speech, just Victor Grant, the lawyer, reading a simple statement. She lived longer than anyone expected and left quieter than anyone believed she could. But in her last days, she found what she valued most, a human connection. Malik was the only guest named in her will. When it was his turn, he stood holding a folded piece of paper, but didn't read from it. "I didn't come here to talk about her legacy," he said. "I just came to say thank you. Thank you for seeing me, and for letting me see her." He left the sunroom lighter than he'd come in, but something of Noreen, her stubborn gentleness, her belief in small kindnesses, followed him. Some weeks later, Malik was waiting at a bus stop, backpack slung over one shoulder. The world around him was the same as ever, impatient, rushing, barely aware. Then he heard a sharp cry. A little girl, maybe 7, had fallen off her scooter, knees scraped and eyes wide with surprise. Her mother was a few steps away, too far to catch her in time. People glanced, hesitated, kept walking. Malik moved without thinking. He knelt, gently wiped the blood from the girl's knee with a tissue from his pocket, and whispered, "You're okay. Happens to all of us." The mother arrived breathless, thanking him again and again. Malik shrugged it off, smiled, and waved them on. But he knew what that moment really was. Not an act of heroism, not some performance for others. Just attention, just kindness, noticed or not. When the bus came, Malik climbed aboard, settled by the window. He opened his wallet, ran his fingers over the now worn note Noreen had left him. "You do not owe the world a performance. Just keep paying attention." He didn't need to be a headline. He didn't need anyone's applause. The lesson she gave him would live in the way he moved through the world, in every quiet, uncelebrated act of care. Sometimes the biggest change begins with the smallest moment, when one person chooses to see another, and sometimes that's enough to rewrite a life.